Welcome to the Creative Force Podcast, a podcast all about empowering you to live in your God-given identity and go after the dreams in your heart. I'm your host, Sharon Stark, and every week we'll be having powerful conversations that will combine practical and biblical wisdom for living your purpose. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the Creative Force Podcast. I'm here today with Tannera Garvin. Tannera was a listener favorite on season 1 of the podcast, and now she is back for season 2. Can you share with us, Tannera, something new about yourself that the audience doesn't already know?
Ooh, something new. I'll have to say, since season 1 to season 2, I've gotten engaged. So that's definitely exciting.
Yeah, that's super exciting. So next time maybe you're on the podcast, it'll be a different last name.
I'll be all like, and I got married.
Yay. And your nails look so cute too. I love that.
Thank you. I'm doing this whole I don't know if you can see them, like kind of a pre-wedding trial. Like, that whole fear is like, I'm going to get my nails done and then I hate them on the wedding day. So I was like, no, I'm going to try all these different styles. And then when I find the one I love, those are the wedding nails.
Yeah, I think that right there is super smart to do. I think I'm going to do that as well when the time comes. So today we are talking about establishing healthy boundaries. And this is a topic that you're so good at teaching. Can you start us off by just telling us, what are boundaries?
No, that is a great question. And if it's okay, I'm actually going to start by sharing with you a story, or really a study that was done. And so I forgot where it was, because I always read all these different studies, a lot of them from Michigan, some from Harvard and other universities that like to do studies on people. Well, they took basically several different groups of children playing at a playground. And what they did is, in one area, they set up a parameter, or boundaries, if you will. So they set up fencing. And so with the fencing that was in place, they wanted to see how the children responded to having boundaries. And then in another area, they had no boundaries, no parameters, no fencing, whatever. And as the children were playing, what they noticed was that the children that had the boundaries in place would take full advantage of the whole field. They would run around, they'd run right up to the fence and slam themselves against it. But they had the freedom to roam the whole yard, knowing they're safe and secure because there were boundaries set up, but they would take advantage of the freedom of the area. But then the study with the other school children who were playing, they noticed the children stayed very close to the jungle gym, that the children very rarely would go out and explore or see other areas because there were no limitations. There was no area to know that's how far I can go. And so most children, therefore, didn't even venture outside of staying next to that jungle gym. So it greatly decreased their ability to experience freedom and joy and enjoying the fullness of what was available to them. And so that's the best way I can explain boundaries, is to say boundaries are put into place, one, as a self-protect, because now that we've got boundaries, we know the children aren't going to go run into the street and get hit by a car. They've got safety. But because they now know that's my boundary line, they know how far they can run. They know the freedom that they have because they know where the limit is. Whereas the children that did not have a limit, they did not have a boundary, because they could not tell where their limit was, they didn't experience as much freedom in their life. They didn't experience as much freedom enjoying the area they were in, right? So that's how I like to relate boundaries in our life personally. That the more I understand, okay, where is my boundary when it comes to my relationship with other people? And what is that boundary based on those different people and the different circles they are in my life? I can fully enjoy that relationship when I know where those boundaries and those limits are. But if I don't know where those are, I'm going to constantly feel like, okay, am I walking on eggshells? Am I offending them? Can I really enjoy the area, the season of life we're in our relationship, if I don't know where the limit or the boundary is placed? And so that's why I really just say, man, boundaries are a way that, one, it is a way to protect. We don't run into the street. We don't get hit by a car. We're able to put up boundaries with people to know, okay, I have an area where I know I can enjoy our relationship, and an area where I say, I don't want to step on you and I don't want to have you step on me. So let's have a clear understanding where that line is so we can fully enjoy our relationship. So I'm hopeful that helps, but really also, boundaries are not only for protection, but they're also for the freedom to enjoy the relationships that you have.
I love that. I think that's really good because I think maybe some people can hear boundaries and think of it in a negative way, but it's actually like you're saying to bring more joy and freedom in your relationships and with yourself. Can you give some examples of like maybe like good boundaries or like bad boundaries? What are some examples of that?
Okay, so again, knowing your boundaries is really going to come down to knowing um, the relationship you're in reference to, right? So I
Hmm.
have boundaries with coworkers, that's different than boundaries I have with good friends, right?
Yeah.
But then boundaries with my friends are different than boundaries with my family, and boundaries with my family are different with like, how can I say it? Like my internal family, like my mom, my dad, my fiance, versus when I say aunts and uncles and cousins, and you start to kind of move outwardly in this,
Yeah.
right? So again, first you need to know, in a sense, the relationship you want to set those boundaries with. So if I say what's an example of a good boundary line, honestly, it's different based on the nature of the relationship. And I kind of just want to put that caveat there first, because this is not a one size fits all conversation, in that I can't say, here's the boundary that works for everyone across the board. Does that help?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll say this for me, a good boundary with, say, let's say a coworker, right? I know when I'm in the office and I'm working, I have an open door policy that's, hey guys, you can come in, you can talk with me. But if my doors close, it's because usually I'm in a meeting or I'm having to do focused work. So that's my boundary. It's a way of saying I
Hmm.
need to respect the time here, but no, I will open my door as soon as I'm available to you, and I will respect your time. If we have meeting time set up, I want to respect that meeting time. I want to show up on time, but I also want to end a little bit early if I can, and not run over, and honor their time as well. That's a healthy boundary, right? When I have friendships, a lot of the healthy boundaries I have in friendships really comes in that area of communication. It may sound funny to say over communicate, but the negative we have a lot of times is we under communicate, or we make assumptions of our friends and think, well, if they were a good friend, then they would just know, or they would just figure this out.
Yeah.
How many times have we, learning this in a relationship now? I cannot do that to my fiance. I can't be like, well, you should know, you should just know how to make me feel good, or you should just know when you make me mad. No, really a healthy boundary we've established is over communication. And what I mean by that as being a healthy boundary is that I do not make assumptions. So
Mm.
I cannot assume that he should know something, he should feel something, or I can't assume because he did something that maybe didn't make me feel good that he automatically meant something bad by it. It's no, let me ask, let me learn, let me discover. So before I run to judgment, let me go ask a question. That, I know people may say, well, is that a boundary? It is actually. It's a
Yeah.
boundary in my mindset to say, I'm not going to run to conclusions, and I'm not going to run to expectations. I'm going to over communicate, and I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to learn to understand really where the other person is, to see, oh, okay, so my feelings were not grounded in truth, they were just grounded in hurt. And so let's talk it through so I can know where you're really at. I will always assume the best of you. That's a boundary I've made in my mind frame, that I say I'm not going to assume the worst. If something happens that I'm like, oh, that came across wrong, it had a negative impact, let me go ask. Right. So that's a healthy boundary. And it has so much to do with our thinking and our mind frame, because you have boundaries physically, right? For self-protection. You lock your doors. There are certain things you do because you have physical boundaries of protection, but you also have to do mental boundaries of your thought process. And that's also another way to, one, protect, but also enjoy the relationships you're in. And so understanding that boundaries is not just a physical thing, or it's not just a committed, like, this is where my line is and you just need to respect it. Sometimes it's also mental and how you're thinking, but it's also communication. And let's find out if the expectation you have of your friend, is it realistic to them? That's the
Mm.
communication piece, right? I don't get to lay down the law and say, well, I want this and that's my boundary. I have to communicate and ask and say, hey, this is what I'm expecting from our friendship or from our relationship. Is that reasonable? And they may come back and say, yeah, I can do that for you. Or they may come back and say, I don't think that's a realistic expectation. I can't do that for you. Had a lot of those with my fiance lately, right? Where we're working out, trying to figure out moving together in life, and having so many conversations around, is my expectation of what our relationship is or where it's going, is it realistic, right? Or is my expectation of this evening realistic? And sometimes it's not, but the only way to find out is to just communicate and ask. Don't make assumptions of other people. And again, that's a boundary we have to set in our mentality of how we think. So I don't know if I'm probably running all over the place.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think that's important what you hit on, like the mental boundary, because I think like a lot of times, you can think of the physical boundaries or like maybe time boundaries, but actually setting a mental boundary for yourself in the way that you interact with people is really good, and not making assumptions. Because I know that I've experienced that in friendships too, where it can be easy to make an assumption of like what that person is thinking, and you just need to ask.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Can you tell us, how have you seen boundaries like transform your own life? Like when you first started learning about boundaries, like how did you start to see that transform your life when you implemented it?
So that is a great question. So this is where I'm probably going to get more into the physical side of boundaries.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, when I started including boundaries, a lot of it for me started out learning at first how to do it physically. And what I mean by that, boundaries are meant to facilitate us accomplishing the call of God or the goals that God has established for us in that year, right? So they really have to be reevaluated every year or every quarter, because as the Lord directs, your boundaries are a way to facilitate you accomplishing that vision, right? That call of God on your life. And so I came up with a season where God very heavily hit hard on me on my health and my finances. And I mean, it's a whole beautiful story of where he like gave me this beautiful vision of my future and was like, now to accomplish it, he's like, I need you to get your health in order and your finances in order. And I was like, great, how do I do it? Right.
Yeah.
So he brought some great relationships into my life and people that I could lean on and say, look, I need help. And I think the first thing when you're looking at establishing boundaries and you're kind of in that place of like, okay, I know I need these, but I don't know how to do it. I don't understand. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to search out wisdom and read books and get information and listen to podcasts, right? But definitely seek wisdom, right? Call out to her. Scripture says that you call out to wisdom in the street and she'll answer you, right? So when you seek
Yeah.
it, it will come to you. So that's what I did, is I really sought wisdom, because I was like, Lord, I know this is the vision you gave me, and I know I'm going to have to put strong restrictions, parameters on my life so that it facilitates me getting to that vision and goal. I just don't know how to do it. And so through that, God brought good relationships. I hired a nutritionist. I began working with a gentleman who helped me kind of figure out how to create new income streams, but also how to budget and financially like get my accounting together. And then also a physical trainer as well. So I had to start putting boundaries around my finances. And that actually then affected friendships. I know that may sound weird, but financially, it was like people would say, hey, let's go out to eat, or let's go grab a cup of coffee. And I was like, yes, I'm the party person, right?
Yeah.
Coffee and eat all the food together. Oh, wait a minute. Financially, I can't afford to go out to eat with my friends all the time. I can't financially afford to go out for 15 cups of coffee this week, right?
Yeah.
So then how do I okay, now I have to put boundaries around it. Does that mean I stop hanging out with people? No, but it may mean I start doing some things less, or I start inviting people over and say, well, hey, I can't really go out for coffee, but why don't you come over and I'll make us coffee, right? So it began to be a way of I had to change my lifestyle, because I had to place strong boundaries on my finances, but I had to do the same thing on what I ate, where then now how I shop, and then like the boundaries around how many calories I'm consuming, what calories I'm consuming, and then working out, where now I'd made a commitment to be in the gym 3 days a week, 3 to 4 days a week. And then I had a physical trainer I met with once a week. But do you know how many times that interrupted fun things I wanted to do? Things. I had even ministry opportunities. People would say, hey, Tannera, can you come minister at our Bible study? Or, hey, Tannera, you want to come and hang out and go skydiving with us, or whatever, right? Something fun. And I want to do it. But at the end of the day, the thing I don't necessarily want to do, but the boundary I had to have in place was, no, I made a commitment to the Lord that I was going to get my health and my finances in order. So I'm going to have to say no, because right now my boundary is I need to go to the gym and work out, or I need to make sure I meal prep Sunday night for my week. Because if I don't meal prep and I don't make that a priority and a boundary line in my life, then I'm going to make bad decisions through the week. Right. This is what happens when there's no food in the fridge.
Yeah.
Hello, well. I'm going to make bad food decisions that now I'm off course to what God has spoken, right? So again, even though the boundaries can be self-protect and freedom, their whole purpose in being there is so that I can get to accomplishing what God has put on my heart to accomplish. But it doesn't always mean that the process of getting there is fun, or that the boundaries are always joyful, happy boundaries you want to put in place. But you need to put them in place so you can accomplish what God has said. So when I started out doing boundaries, it was very much physical, but then it bled into like, okay, I've got to work on my mentality, because now I feel like I'm offending my friends because I'm saying no all the time. And then I feel like I never get to have fun. So how do I balance that, right? And then how do I then communicate with friends? Because I had some friends that had such a high demand on my time, that it was that place of, okay, well, now I've got to figure out what's my boundary line with my friends. Because some of them I would have to say, okay, I'm going to have a real conversation now about boundaries so they can understand, yes, I love them, but the time you're expecting of me, right? Expectations is not realistic. Because I have goals that God has told me to focus on this year, I cannot give you the amount of time that you're expecting of me, right? Or I can't give you the attention that you're expecting of me. And sometimes that went over well and people could understand it. Sometimes people got mad and offended, and I've lost friends over it. But at the end of the day, I'm responsible to what the Lord has spoken, and ensure that I'm walking towards accomplishing that. So
that's really good. I like how you're explaining that the boundaries actually help you facilitate your vision. And I don't even know if I've necessarily thought about it in that way. So how would somebody, if they want to establish boundaries in their life and they maybe don't even know what their boundaries are, what would you suggest for a person to go about figuring that out?
Oh, that's so good. Okay. So there's two signs whenever I notice I have a crossed boundary line.
Okay. Yeah.
Thing that's very interesting. Everybody has boundaries, but not everybody realizes where those boundaries are. And I think the first thing is discover what your boundaries are and then adjust them, because you can't adjust your boundaries till first you start to realize what's really messing with you. And a lot of it's based around what you're valuing, which may need to be adjusted, or it may be correct, right? But I'll say this is like, when I begin to notice I've had a boundary line stepped on or crossed, there's two reactions that I get. One, I get that cringe factor. So you know how it is, like when you're maybe around something or somebody says something or does something, or they're like, hey, Sharon, we're so excited you're going to be in this new production. You get to work with this person, and everything in you is like, not that person, right? That cringy feeling. And you're like, why am I getting so cringy? Well, because there's a value in you that you feel like just got crossed. There's a boundary line in you that says, I really like, let's say it's somebody you're like, I don't want to have to work with them because they're always late. I know they're not going to be on time. I know, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I really have a value for respecting people's time.
Wow. Yeah.
Notice when this person's always showing up late, I get that, really? Where's the respect, right? Like you start to notice that cringe factor. And then sometimes it can also get to a point where then the second one I say you get is anger, where you actually get angry. And then you're like, wait, why am I so angry? Examine the emotion. Man, it's so important that we do that, because so many times we run off with a feeling and we assume because we have the emotion and the feeling that it's justified or it's right. But you have to actually examine it and see, is it merited in truth? Is it something we can adjust? Is it something we need to have a conversation about? Or is it legitimately something that you say, okay, Lord, I need to give the emotion to you, but I do need to work out with this other person so we don't keep crossing this boundary line, right?
Yeah.
I've also had those moments where I've gotten angry about something and I would literally be like, why am I so mad right now?
Yeah.
I'd have to examine and think through the process of, okay, why am I mad that they just asked me to do this? Okay, because I feel like they're assuming or thinking of me XYZ. Well, are they really thinking that? Or am I, in my mind, just now making assumptions? Oh, okay, you know what? Maybe I should talk to them because it feels like they're expecting this of me. Like, okay, so I'll say this. Probably won't share this with my fiance, but I had an argument the other day. He knows I tell on him, where he had shared something with me. And I was like, what? Like, so we constantly had this conversation around like, if you feel like I've stepped on your air hose, right? Or you feel like I've crossed a boundary, please let me know. Well, he kept getting this cringe factor every time I would say a phrase. And I didn't understand it. I was like, I don't get why that bothers you. But we would have situations where, say, we went to a dinner party and I was like, well, it's mostly girls. You know what? I'm going to just release you. You go hang out with the one man that's here. You don't have to sit by my side the whole time. I don't want you to feel awkward, right? But it was when I would say that word, like release, or I'm going to let you, he would get this cringe feeling of like,
Mm.
oh, you're going to release me. Oh, you're going to let me. And then that anger and that pride would rise up in him of all like, well, I'll show you I'm my own man. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Whoa, where's this coming from? Like, there's no desire in me to say I own you. But yet that phrasing, again, it's just words, but it's the way those words impacted him, right? And so all of a sudden, here's a line for him of, no, I value freedom. And he's like, and I need to feel free in this. I'm like, absolutely. Like, it's not my mode of doing it. The motive of my heart, the intention of my heart was to say, look, I don't want you to feel stuck. I want you to feel free. So just know I don't have an expectation of you to sit with me in these moments. I'm good. Right.
Yeah.
So that's where we had to have a conversation to discuss intention versus impact that it was having on him, because it was crossing for him a value or a boundary line of freedom. And so then in that conversation, I was able to say, okay, I can make that change because it's literally just verbiage. Like, you understand my heart, but I get saying it this way actually crosses a line for you. So if I just say, hey, I want you to know you don't have to sit with me. You can do whatever is in your, your desire zone, right? Like, he's good with that. And so I've had to change the way I phrase some things so he can understand the intent of my heart versus it appearing or coming across like I'm stepping on a boundary line for him, if that makes sense. And I think a lot of times in communication, this is what happens. We're usually not willing to talk out. Okay, let's talk through, like, why is it you're feeling that way? Okay, it's not my intention, but apparently I'm having that impact. Okay, I have to own that impact. But what can I change so I can get my intention across to you and make a solid impact, a good impact on you, not negative, right?
I think that's really interesting about even just like your words can be a boundary to some people, because there could be something that maybe someone's had a bad experience with, and you say those words and it kind of triggers that in them. And so even realizing like some people have that. And I like what you said too about the cringe factor, because I've definitely felt that. I know what you're talking about. So I know, like, okay, yeah, that was a boundary that person just crossed. And yeah.
Yeah.
So once you establish those boundaries, like what do you do if someone reacts negatively to you establishing that boundary? And I know, like, for me, a big one is time and like managing my time. So maybe it's like someone's asked you to do something and you're like, nope, I cannot help you with that. And what do you do if they have a bad reaction?
Oh my gosh, that's so good. I have so many examples. So I'll use a time example since you brought that one up. So one of the time examples that I have is that when I really became focused on, God has given me a vision this year of what I need to do, what I need to put my focus on, then I did start backing off of other commitments, and a lot of times, and especially Sharon, I know you're this way, like, you have such a heart to serve people that you have the temptation to overcommit, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yes.
after a while, you're like, wait a minute, I'm doing great things for other people, but am I actually accomplishing what God told me to do this year? Right. And
Yeah.
so how do we keep that priority? You need boundaries to assist you in completing that priority, right? And to reaching that goal God has put in front of you. And so I was having to set boundaries with a friend. It was a difficult situation. And I was having to sit down. And so I actually did a sit down with her. Now, sometimes I don't have to. A lot of times I can just set boundaries and say, hey, sorry, I'm just unavailable. Thank you for asking. And I've learned this, if it helps with setting time with most people. I don't tell them what I'm doing. I just tell them that I'm booked. And the reason that's so important to know is because, especially coming from the South, being a good Southern girl,
Yeah.
it was kind of that thing. Like, I grew up with people when you would say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I've got X, Y, and Z going on. And they're like, okay, well, like, that's awesome. But I'm pretty sure, like, could you do that on Sunday so that you're available Saturday to help me? Like, they try to change your schedule.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's kind of that way of how do I get into your life and change things so that I can get you to help me, right? And I don't think there's a bad intention around it. Sometimes it's the way people are trained up and how they communicate. But how do you set a solid line? And so I began to learn is, you know what? I have to be strong at holding my line. And so when I say, hey, thank you so much for asking, unfortunately, man, I'm already booked at that time. But you know what? If there's something we can do in the future, then let's go ahead and book out, right? I mean, you kind of know this with me. When we try to book our times together, we typically try to put them reoccurring so that they're on there. But when they're not, it's like, okay, I'm going to need to book at least 2 weeks to 3 months, or 2 weeks to a month out, right? So we find space. And some people will easily say, oh, okay, I understand, and they honor it. Some people won't, because the urgency, they feel they want to make your emergency. And so you have to stand solid and say, look, I'm so sorry for the inconvenience of that, but this is the reality of where it's at. But don't try to brush down their feathers, if that makes sense. You are responsible for the boundaries of what lives inside of your responsibility. And that's where I like the hula hoop analogy. Like, if you have a hula hoop around you, what do you own? You own your time, your words. You're responsible for your words. You're responsible for your heart, for your belief system, but you're not responsible for their reaction to your word. You're not responsible for their reaction to your decisions, but you're responsible to your decisions, right? So I can speak in love and I can speak kind, but I can speak firmly. And if the other person responds negatively, that doesn't belong to me, that belongs to them. So I will say, sometimes setting boundaries, people don't respond well to. When I say I have lost a friendship over it, I have. There was one girl who, when I was really going through that strong season of, I'm going to have to back off of timeframes to give more into working out and how I'm planning and she got mad at me one day and she was like, we never hang out anymore. We never do stuff. And I'm like, but we're hanging out right now. Why are you so mad? Anyway, but I just had to tell her, I said, well, I've just got some priorities right now, and this is what I need to focus on. And she's like, it's just an excuse. You just don't want to be my friend. And I was like, well, I love you, but if that's how you feel, I mean, that's your choice. Ultimately, and it was the story she was telling herself in her head became more true to her than the truth in front of her, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it was, and that's kind of that whole place where we have to always be careful what we're choosing to believe in our mind, because a lot of times we tell ourselves a story that's not even true to reality. And then we allow these emotions to be built from that thinking, because what we think creates emotions, right? And then now we're convinced it's the truth, that the whole world is against me and right? And it's, okay, well, now you've just become a victim to yourself. No one's actually against you. And so it's kind of that place of, when you set in a boundary and someone else has a negative reaction, you are not responsible for their negative reaction. It is not your job to appease them. And, again, being a nice Southern girl, I used to be prey to being people pleaser. I had to make sure everybody was okay. And, oh, if I did that wrong and I offended them, what if they're hurt? And then I worried about their emotions. And we have to grow up to a point to say, look, I am not responsible for your emotions. I'm not going to live in the drama of your emotions. I am called to live into what God has called me to do. And that's what I'm responsible to. And if I'm going to exert my emotions on anything, it's going to be on that, not on you, drama. And you can still love them. You can still hang out with people, be friends with them, but you have to also draw that line of, I'm only responsible for what's in my hula hoop. I'm not responsible for your reaction to my answer.
That's powerful. That's really important to just even meditate on that and to get that truth. I really love that. And I remember, I think in conversation once you said that every yes that you make has to be defended by 1,000 no's. Is that how it goes?
Phrase. Yeah, every yes must be defended by 1,000 no's. It's my favorite phrase. I live by it. You should say no more than you say yes.
Yeah. And that's so true, because what you say yes to, like, you are going to have to protect that. For anyone who wants to go like deeper into the study of boundaries, are there any like books or resources you recommend?
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. So I'll have to say my favorite when it comes to boundaries is Dr. Henry Cloud. He's written several books. So there's one called Boundaries, which is the first standard basic. He's also got several additions to it, depending on what you're looking to set boundaries with, because there's boundaries in marriage, boundaries with teens, boundaries with friends, boundaries with leaders. He's got a million varieties. So depending on what you want to dig more into, I would say definitely go down that rabbit hole. I have, and I love it. I'm not even married yet, and I've already been through boundaries in marriage, and I'm going to go through it again. And then the other one he does that I love is called Necessary Endings by Dr. Henry Cloud. And the reason I love that one, and I think it's so important, is he talks about how people flow in and out of the different circles of your life. And it's okay. It's healthy. You don't have to try to hold on to the friend you were friends with when you were 12. And now that you're 40, you're trying to still be their friend, but it's like pulling you down or pulling you away from what God is calling you into. So how do you allow people the freedom and the safety to flow in and out of those different realms or circles, right, of relationship? Yeah. And then also the thing I love in Necessary Endings is some relationships or even some commitments that you make, the season is over. So how do you prune those things from your life so it can allow the new roses that God is wanting to grow in you to give them space to grow and bud? You have to cut off some things where the season is over. And so how do you do that well? He teaches that beautifully in Necessary Endings. And so that's another one I highly recommend.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your time today, Tannera. Can you share with the audience, if they wanted to connect with you, is there a place that they could reach out to you on?
That is a great question. So Luke and I are going to actually start working on that, I think, over the next year, is building up my coaching business. As of right now, I don't necessarily have a public platform outside of maybe Instagram. And you can just search my name, Tannera Garvin, for that one. But as far as more teachings, I would encourage you, if you even check out YouTube, but if you do Charis Bible College Relationship University, I do teach a lot in Relationship University through Charis. So I know YouTube has several different teachings there. If you go to the charisbiblecollege.org website and you go through the archive or live streams to archives, you can see all the Relationship University archives there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Do you have big dreams but no idea how to get there? Do you struggle with accomplishing the things that are most important to you? If you answered yes to those questions, I would like to offer you my free workbook called How to Get Unstuck, a free guide on how to get unstuck and live your dreams. This resource is full of tactics I use to help get me unstuck, and I believe that they will do the same for you. You can download this free guide on my blog at youareacreativeforce.com. The show notes for today's episode are available on my blog at youareacreativeforce.com, as well as other resources and inspiration to go after your dreams.